This is not just a story about one announcement, one press conference, or one political figure. It is a story about power, resources, and what happens when global influence collides with a country that holds something the world cannot ignore. According to publicly available statements, Donald Trump has said that the United States will run Venezuela until what he describes as a safe, proper, and judicious transition can be ensured. Those words alone immediately raise questions, not because they are dramatic, but because they are unusually direct. Running a country, even temporarily, is not a small claim. It implies responsibility, authority, and long-term consequences that extend far beyond a single administration or election cycle. But what makes this situation especially complex is not only the political language. It is what consistently appears at the center of every explanation, every justification, and every forward-looking plan: energy. According to U.S. officials, American forces conducted an operation that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. These claims have been strongly disputed by Venezuelan authorities, who describe the events as military aggression and insist that Maduro remains the country's only legitimate leader. Both narratives exist at the same time, and neither side shows signs of backing down. What is notable, however, is how quickly the conversation moved past the operation itself. Instead of focusing on the legality and the timing or the international process, the discussion shifted toward what comes next. Who managed the transition? Who stabilized the country? And who restores what has been described as a broken system? In public remarks, Trump emphasized that Venezuela's oil industry has been neglected for years, and that major U.S. oil companies would step in to repair infrastructure, invest capital, and begin generating revenue. He framed this not as exploitation, but as recovery. On the surface, the argument sounds straightforward: fix the infrastructure, restart production, stabilize the economy. But this framing leaves out a crucial detail. Venezuela does not simply have oil. It has more proven oil reserves than any other country in the world. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Venezuela holds approximately 303 billion barrels of crude oil. That represents about 20% of global reserves. This single fact changes how every statement should be understood, because countries with resources of that scale are never just managing internal problems. They are a part of global supply chains, geopolitical calculations, and long-term strategic planning. Inside Venezuela, the official response has been firm and uncompromising. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has publicly stated that Maduro remains the only legitimate president and that the country is prepared to defend its sovereignty. A state of national emergency was declared, and U.S. actions were condemned as violations of international law. At the same time, Trump claimed that Rodriguez had been in communication with U.S. officials and was willing to cooperate with transition plans, a claim she later rejected publicly. These contradictory statements highlight a deeper issue. When authority itself is disputed, every action becomes contested, and every outcome becomes unstable. International reactions reflect this uncertainty. Russia and China strongly condemn the U.S. actions, describing them as the use of force against a sovereign nation. Several Latin American countries, including Venezuela's neighbors, expressed concern about escalation and regional instability. European leaders took a more cautious approach. Some stated they did not recognize Maduro as a legitimate president, yet emphasized that any transition must be peaceful, lawful, and respectful of the will of the Venezuelan people. There is no unified international response. And in global politics, lack of consensus often creates space for prolonged tension. Another major justification cited by the U.S. administration involves narcotics trafficking. According to U.S. officials, Maduro and Flores face charges related to drug trafficking and weapons offenses in American courts. The administration has described recent military actions as part of a broader counter-narcotics strategy. However, publicly available expert assessments describe Venezuela as a secondary transit country, not a primary producer. Fentanyl, frequently mentioned in official statements, is produced mainly in Mexico and trafficked primarily through land routes into the United States. This gap between rhetoric and expert analysis does not automatically invalidate claims, but it does complicate them. It raises questions about proportionality, evidence, and the true drivers behind policy decisions. Throughout every explanation, one element remains consistent. Oil infrastructure is always mentioned first, not electoral reform and not humanitarian corridors, not rebuilding civil institutions. Energy remains the anchor point. This is not unusual in global affairs. Energy security influences everything from inflation to foreign policy. Control over production does not require permanent occupation. It requires access, predictability, and leverage. One of the most striking aspects of the situation is what has not been clearly defined. There is no publicly stated timeline for elections. No international supervisory body has been announced. No clear endpoint has been articulated. History shows that transitions without clear timelines tend to evolve in unexpected ways, sometimes slowly, sometimes indefinitely. Not always because of intent, but because uncertainty itself becomes a stabilizing force for those in control. The regional consequences of this situation are already being discussed behind closed doors. Venezuela's instability affects migration flows, energy markets, and political balances across Latin America. Neighboring countries fear economic pressure, social disruption, and diplomatic fallout. Even governments that oppose Maduro have expressed concern about unilateral actions, setting precedents that could one day be used against them. This story, however, extends beyond Venezuela. It reflects a broader pattern in which resource-rich nations become focal points during periods of global uncertainty. When energy markets tighten and supply chains become fragile, political ideals and strategic interests often intersect. The difficult question is not whether Venezuela needs change. Many agree that it does. The real question is how change is defined, who controls it, and who benefits first. Is stability imposed from the outside ever neutral, or does it inevitably reflect the priorities of those with the power to enforce it? As events continue to unfold, the outcome will not be decided by a single headline or courtroom appearance. It will emerge gradually, shaped by negotiations, resistance, economic realities, and international pressure. What happens next may redefine not only Venezuela's future, but also how the world approaches transitions in countries where resources and power are tightly intertwined.